I want to go down the tunnel of time and look at what could be termed the Roman deep state, to see the influence they had on politics of its day and selecting leaders. It's called the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard was an elite unit of the Imperial Roman army whose members served as personal bodyguards to the Roman emperors. During the era of the Roman Republic, the Praetorians served as a small escort force for high-ranking officials, such as senators or provincial governors, like procurators, and also serving as bodyguards for high-ranking officers within the Roman legions. With the Republic's transition into the Roman Empire, however, the first emperor, Augustus, founded the Guard as his personal security detail. Although they continued to serve in this capacity for roughly 3 centuries, the Guard became notable for its intrigue and interference in Roman politics, to the point of overthrowing emperors and proclaiming their successors. In 312, the Guard was disbanded by Constantine the Great. Under the Roman Republic, the designation originated during the Roman Republic for the guards of Roman generals as early as the rise to prominence of the Scipio family around 275 BC. There was no permanent guard charged with the protection of military general officers. However, certain military officers chose to surround themselves with guards to ensure their security. For example, during the siege of Numantia, Scipio Aemilianus formed a troop of 500 men for his personal protection, as sorties were often quite dangerous for the upper ranks. This usage was then emulated and spread as Roman generals occupied their positions for longer periods of time. Accordingly, this guard was referred to as cohortes praetoria. In the event of battle, these cohorts would intervene as a final standing reserve. The consuls were ordinarily protected by the lictors, who would remain around their tents in the army. At the end of the year 40 BC, Octavian, the future Augustus, and his rival Mark Antony both operated a number of Praetorian units organized individually. According to Appian, amongst them were veterans forming cohorts. Antony commanded 3 cohorts in the Orient, and in 32 BC, he issued coins in honor of his Praetorians. According to Paul Rose, Octavian commanded 5 cohorts at Actium. Following his victory at Actium, Octavian merged his forces with those of his adversary in a symbolic reunification of the army of Julius Caesar. Under the empire, the legionnaires known as the Praetorian Guard were first hand-picked veterans of the Roman army who served as bodyguards to the emperor. First established by Augustus, members of the Guard occupied him on active campaign and served as secret police, protecting the civic administrations and rule of law imposed by the Senate and emperor. The Praetorian Guard was ultimately dissolved by Emperor Constantine I in the 4th century. They were distinct from the Imperial German bodyguard, which provided close personal protection for the late Western Roman emperors. They benefited from several advantages due their close proximity with the emperor. The Praetorians were the only ones admitted while bearing arms in the center of sacred Rome. Their mandatory service was shorter in duration. For instance, 12 years with the Praetorians instead of 16 years in the legions, starting in year 13 BC, then carried to, respectively, 16 to 20 years in the year 5 BC, according to Tacitus, and their pay was higher than that of a legionary. Under Nero, the pay of a praetorian was 3.5 times that of a legionary, augmented by prime additions of donativum, granted by each new emperor. This additional pay was the equivalent of several years of pay and was often repeated at important events of the empire or events that touched the imperial family, birthdays, births, and marriages. Major monetary distributions or food subsidies renewed and compensated the fidelity of the Praetorians, following each failed particular attempted plot, such as that of Messalina against Claudius in AD 48, or Piso against Nero in AD 65. Feared and dreaded by the population and by the Roman Senate, the Praetorians got no shred of sympathy from the Roman people. A famous poem by Juvenal recalls the nail left in his foot by the sandal of a Praetorian rushing by him. Praetorian has a pejorative sense in French, recalling the often troubling role of the Praetorian of antiquity. The Praetorians received substantially higher pay than other Roman soldiers in any of the legions on a system known as sesquiplex stipendem, or by pay and a half. So, if the legionaries received 250 denarii, the guards received 375 per annum. Domitian and Septimus Severus increased the stipendum to 1,500 denarii per year, distributed in January, May, and September. The early Praetorian Guard differed greatly from that in later times, which came to be a vital force in the power politics of Rome. While Augustus understood the need to have a protector in the maelstrom of Rome, he was careful to uphold the republican veneer of his regime. Thus, he allowed only 9 cohortes to be formed, each originally consisting of 500 men. He then increased them to 1,000 men each, but allowed 3 units to be kept on duty at any given time in the capital. A small number of detached cavalry units of 30 men each were also organized. While they patrolled inconspicuously in the palace and major buildings, the others were stationed in the towns surrounding Rome. This system was not radically changed with the appointment of Augustus in 2 BC of the 2 Praetorian prefects, Quintus Astorius Scapula and Publius Salvius Aper. Although organization and command were enhanced, Tacitus reports that the number of cohorts was increased from 12 to 9 in AD 47. In AD 69, it was briefly increased to 16 cohorts by Vitellius, but Vespasian quickly reduced it again to 9. Under the Julio-Claudian dynasty, in Rome, their principal duty was to mount the guard at the house of Augustus on the Palatine, where the centuries and the turmae of the cohort in service mounted the guard outside the emperor's palace. The interior guard of the palace was mounted by the imperial German bodyguard, often referred to as the Batavi and the stators. Augusti, a sort of military police, which were found in the general staff headquarters of the Roman army. Every afternoon, the serving tribune of the cohort would receive the password from the emperor personally. The command of this cohort was assumed directly by the emperor, and not by the Praetorian prefect. After the construction of the Praetorian camp in 23 BC, there was another similar serving tribune placed in the Praetorian camp accordingly. Their functions included, among the many, the escort of the emperor and the members of the imperial family, and, if necessary, to act as a sort of anti-riot police. Certain empresses commanded exclusively their own Praetorian Guard. According to Tacitus, in the year 23 BC, there were 9 Praetorian cohorts, 4,500 men, the equivalent of a legion, to maintain peace in Italy. 3 were stationed in Rome, and the others nearby. The first intervention of the Praetorians on a battlefield since the wars of the end of the Republic took place during the mutinies of Pannonia and the mutinies of Germania. On the death of Augustus in AD 14, his successor, Tiberius, was confronted by mutinies in the 2 armies of the Rhine and Pannonia, who were protesting about their conditions of service in comparison with the Praetorians. The forces of Pannonia were dealt with by Drusus Julius Caesar, son of Tiberius, accompanied by 2 Praetorian cohorts, the Praetorian cavalry and Imperial German bodyguards. The mutiny in Germania was repressed by the nephew and designated heir of Tiberius, Germanicus, who later led legions and detachments of the Guard in a 2-year campaign in Germania, and succeeded in recovering 2 of the 3 legionary eagles, which had been lost at the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. It was under Tiberius that Lucius Aelius Sejanus rose in power, and was among the first prefects to exploit his position to pursue his own ambitions. He concentrated under his command all the Praetorian cohorts in the new camp. Sejanus held the title of prefect jointly with his father under Augustus, but became sole prefect in AD 15. He used that position to render himself essential to the new emperor Tiberius, who was unable to persuade the Senate to share the responsibility of governing the empire. Sejanus, however, alienated Drusus, son of Tiberius, and when the heir to the throne, Germanicus, died in AD 19, he was worried that Drusus would become the new emperor. Accordingly, he poisoned Drusus with the help of the latter's wife, and then immediately launched a ruthless elimination program against all competitors, persuading Tiberius to make him his heir apparent. He almost succeeded, but his plot was discovered and revealed in AD 31, and he was subsequently killed. Emperor Tiberius used for this purpose the cohortes urbanae, which were not under the control of Sejanus. In AD 37, Caligula became emperor with the support of Naevius Sutorius Macro, Sejanus' successor, as prefect of the Praetorian Guard. Under Caligula, whose reign lasted until AD 41, the overall strength of the Guard increased from 9 to 12 Praetorian cohorts. In year 41, it was discussed in hostility of a Praetorian tribune named Cassius Chaerea, whom Caligula teased without mercy due to his squeaky voice, which led to the assassination of the emperor by officers of the Guard. While the Imperial German bodyguard sacked all in a search to apprehend the murderers, the Senate proclaimed the restoration of a republic. The Praetorians, which were pillaging the palace, discovered Claudius, uncle of Caligula, hidden behind a curtain. Needing an emperor to justify their own existence, they brought him forth to the Praetorian camp and proclaimed him emperor. He is the first emperor proclaimed by the Praetorian Guard, and compensated the Guard with a prime bonus worth 5 years of their salary. The Praetorians accompanied Emperor Claudius to Britain in 43 AD. When Claudius was poisoned, the Guard transferred their allegiance to Nero through the influence of his Praetorian prefect, Sextus Afranius Burrus, who exercised a beneficial influence on the new emperor during the first 5 years of his reign. Officers of the guard, including one of the two successors of Burrus as the Praetorian prefect, participated in Piso's conspiracy in year 65. The other Praetorian prefect, Tigellinus, headed the suppression of the conspiracy, and the guard was compensated with a bonus of 500 denarii for each man. The year of the four emperors. In AD 69, the new colleague of Tigellinus, Nymphidius Sabinus, managed to have the Praetorian Guard abandon Nero in favor of the contender Galba. Nymphidius Sabinus had promised 7,500 denarius per man, but Galba refused to pay that amount because he stated, "It is my habit to recruit soldiers and not buy them." This permitted his rival Otho to bribe 23 speculators of the Praetorian Guard to proclaim him emperor. Despite the opposition of the cohortes in service in the palace, Galba and his designated successor, the young Pisan, were lynched on January 15th. After supporting Otho against a third contender, Vitellius, the Praetorians were restrained following defeat and their centurions executed. They were replaced by 16 cohorts recruited from the legionaries and auxiliaries loyal to Vitellius, almost 16,000 men. These ex-Praetorians then aided Vespasian, the fourth emperor, leading the attack against the Praetorian camp. The Flavian dynasty. Under the Flavians, the Praetorians formed 9 new cohorts, of which Titus, son of Emperor Vespasian, became the prefect. Vespasian returned the effective strength of each unit to 500 men. He also canceled the guard service of the Praetorians at the entry to the emperor's palace, but retained guards within the palace itself. Under Vespasian's second son, Domitian, the number of cohorts was increased to 10, and the Praetorian Guard participated in fighting in Germania and on the Danube against the Dacians. It was in the course of these actions that the prefect, Cornelius Fuscus, was defeated and killed in 86. The Antonine dynasty. Following the assassination of Domitian in 96, the Praetorians demanded the execution of their prefects, Petronius Secundus, who had been implicated in the murder. The guard supported Trajan, commander of the army of the Rhine, as new emperor. At the death of Nerva, at the beginning of 98, Trajan executed the remaining Praetorian prefect and his partisans. Trajan returned to Rome from the Rhine, probably accompanied by the new unit of Equites Singulares Augusti. The Praetorian Guard had participated in the 2 Dacian wars of Trajan. The Praetorian Guard served in the last campaign of Trajan against the Parthians of 113 to 117. During the 2nd century, the Praetorian Guard accompanied Lucius Verus in the Oriental War campaign of 161 to 166 AD, as well as accompanying Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius in his northern campaigns between 169 to 175 and 178 to 180. 2 prefects were killed during these expeditions. With the accession of Commodus in 180, the Praetorian Guard returned to Rome. Tigidius Perennis, 182 to 185, and freedman Marcus Aurelius Clender, 160 to 190, exercised considerable influence on the emperor. Perennis was killed by a delegation of 1,500 persons of Great Britain, which came forth to complain about his interference in the affairs of the province. A delegation of lanciarii of the 3 legions of Great Britain. Cleander abused his influence to nominate and dismiss prefects. In 188, Cleander obtained the joint command of the guard with the 2 prefects. Cleander ordered a massacre of civilians carried by the equites singularis Augusti, which led to an arranged battle with the urban cohortes. Severan dynasty. Commodus fell victim to a conspiracy directed by his Praetorian prefect, Quintus Aemilius Laetus, in 192. The new emperor, Pertinax, who took part in the conspiracy, paid the Praetorians a premium of 3,000 denarii. However, he was assassinated 3 months later, on March 28, 193, by a group of guards. The Praetorians then put the empire up to auction, and Didius Julianus bought the title of emperor. However, the armies of the Danube chose instead the governor of Pannonia Superior, Septimus Severus, who besieged Rome and tricked the Praetorians when they came out unarmed. The Praetorian Guard was dissolved and replaced by men transferred from his own army. The new guard of Septimus Severus made their mark against his rival, Clodius Albinus, at the Battle of Lyon in 197, and accompanied the emperor to the Orient from 197 to 202, then to Britannia from 208 until his death at York in 211. Caracalla, son of Septimus Severus, lost favor with his troops by assassinating his own brother and co-emperor, Geta, immediately after his succession. He also created problems by trying to recreate a Macedonian phalange witnessed previously in the Roman army. Finally, in 217, while on campaign in the Orient, he was assassinated at the instigation of his prefect, Marcinus. After the elimination of the latter, the Praetorians made opposition to the new emperor, Elagabalus, priest of the Oriental cult of Elagabal, and replaced him by his 13-year-old cousin, Severus Alexander, in 222. In this period, the position of the Praetorian prefect in Italy came increasingly to resemble a general administrative post, and there was a tendency to appoint jurists, such as Aemilius Papinius, who occupied the post from 203 until his elimination and execution at the ascent of Caracalla. Under Severus Alexander, the Praetorian prefecture was held by the lawyer Ulpian until his assassination by the Praetorian Guard in the presence of the emperor himself. 3rd century. In the spring of 238, under Maximus Thrax, the bulk of the Praetorian Guard was employed on active service. Defended by only a small residual garrison, the Praetorian camp was attacked by a civilian crowd acting in support of senators in a revolt against the Gordian emperors. The failure of Maximinus Thrax to win the civil war against the contenders Gordian I and Gordian II led to his death at the hands of his own troops, including the Praetorians. The senatorial candidates for the throne, Popenius and Balbinus, recalled the Praetorian Guard to Rome, only to find themselves under attack by the Praetorians. Both were killed on July 29th, 238, and Gordian III triumphed. After 238, literary and epigraphic sources dry up, and information on the Praetorian Guard becomes rare. In 249, the Praetorians assassinated Philippus II, son of the Emperor Philip the Arab. In 272, in the reign of the Emperor Aurelian, they took part in an expedition against Palmyra. In 284, Diocletian reduced the status of the Praetorians. They were no longer to be part of palace life, as Diocletian lived in Nicomedia, some 60 miles from Byzantium in Asia Minor. 2 new corps of the Ioviani and Herculiani, named after the gods Jove or Jupiter and Hercules, associated with the senior and junior emperor, replaced the Praetorians as the personal protectors of the emperors, a practice that remained intact with the Tetrarchy. In 297, they were in Africa with Maximian. By the time Diocletian retired on May 1st, 305, their Castra Praetoria seems to have housed only a minor garrison of Rome. Dissolution. During the early 4th century, Caesar Flavius Valerius Severus attempted to disband the Praetorian Guard on the orders of Galerius. In response, the Praetorians turned to Maxentius, the son of the retired emperor Maximian, and proclaimed him their emperor on 28 October 306. By 312, however, Constantine the Great marched on Rome with an army in order to eliminate Maxentius and gain control of the Western Roman Empire, resulting in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Ultimately, Constantine's army achieved a decisive victory against the Praetorians, whose emperor was killed during the fighting. With the death of Maxentius, Constantine definitively disbanded the remnants of the Praetorian Guard. The remaining soldiers were sent out to various corners of the empire, and the Castra Praetoria was dismantled in a grand gesture, inaugurating a new age in Roman history and ending that of the Praetorians. Political role. Praetorian cohortes intervened on numerous occasions in the struggle for imperial succession. Lacking troops of its own, the Senate had no choice each time but to accept the choice of the Praetorians as well as that of the various legions. The new emperor was always proclaimed by the Praetorians before being ratified by the Senate and the legions stationed in various provinces. After the death of Sejanus, who was sacrificed for the donative, the imperial gift, promised by Tiberius, the guards began to play an increasingly ambitious and bloody game in the empire. For the right price, or at will, they assassinated emperors, bullied their own prefects, or turned on the people of Rome. In 41, Caligula was killed by conspirators from the senatorial class and from the guard, along with his wife and daughter. The Praetorians placed his uncle Claudius on the throne, daring the Senate to oppose their decision. In 69, the year of the 4 emperors, after the Emperor Galba failed to provide a donative for the Praetorians, they transferred their allegiance to Otho and assassinated the emperor. Otho acquiesced in the Praetorians' demands and granted them the right to appoint their own prefects, ensuring their loyalty. After defeating Otho, Vitellius disbanded the guard and established a new guard, 16 cohorts strong. Vespasian relied in the war against Vitellius upon the disgruntled cohorts the emperor had dismissed, and reduced the number of cohorts back to 9 upon becoming emperor himself. As a further safeguard, he appointed his son Titus as Praetorian prefect. While the Guard had the power to make or break emperors, it had no formal role in government administration, unlike the personnel of the palace, the Senate, and the bureaucracy. Often, after an outrageous act of violence, revenge by the new ruler was forthcoming. In 193, Didius Julianus purchased the empire from the Guard for a vast sum when the Guard auctioned it off after killing Pertinax. Later that year, Septimius Severus marched into Rome, disbanded the Guard, and started a new formation from his own Pannonian legions. Unruly mobs in Rome often fought with the Praetorians in Maximinus Thrax's reign in vicious street battles. This long history of king-making, political meddling, unchecked abuses of power, assassinations, and continuous power plays led to the now famous question, who guards the guards? And it seems the Romans answered this question long ago by dissolving the guards altogether.